You need to listen to me right now.
I don't think so. This is my decision.
With manicured lawns stretching in geometric perfection, flower beds bursting with seasonal blooms, and streets so clean you could probably eat off them. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground, and I watched as neighbors waved to each other from their porches, the very picture of suburban harmony. Marcos squeezed my hand as we stood on the driveway, Lily cooing softly in the carrier strapped to my chest. "This is it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is where we're going to raise our family." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. After years of saving every penny, working overtime shifts at the hospital while Marcus built his accounting practice, we'd finally scraped together enough for a down payment. The house needed work, sure, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, a backyard where Lily could eventually play, and a community that seemed to care about maintaining standards. What more could we ask for? The warning signs started before we'd even finished unpacking. On our second day, as I was struggling to carry a box of kitchenware up the front steps while simultaneously preventing Lily from grabbing my hair, a silver Lexus pulled up to the curb. The woman who emerged looked like she'd stepped out of a reality TV show about wealthy housewives. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves. Her white pantsuit was absolutely spotless, despite the summer humidity, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she approached with a clipboard clutched in her manicured hands. "Welcome to Willowbrook Estates," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that immediately put me on guard. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Homeowners Association. I wanted to personally deliver your welcome packet and go over some of our community guidelines." She thrust the clipboard toward me, forcing me to awkwardly shift the box to one hip. The packet she'd mentioned turned out to be a 3-inch thick binder filled with rules, regulations, and bylaws, printed in tiny font. "Just a few things to maintain our property values and ensure everyone enjoys living here," she added with that same plastic smile. I thanked her and promised to read through everything, but Patricia wasn't finished. Her eyes had locked onto the faded blue paint on our shutters, paint that had been peeling when we bought the house and was on our list to fix once we'd settled in. "You'll want to address that immediately," she said, tapping a pen against the shutter. Section 4.2.1. The HOA bylaws specifies that all exterior paint must be maintained in pristine condition. You have 30 days from move-in to bring everything into compliance, or you'll start accruing fines. Before I could respond, she'd moved on to critiquing the small patch of crabgrass near our mailbox, the dent in our garage door, and the fact that our trash cans were visible from the street even though it was trash day. Marcus joined me on the porch just as Patricia was writing up our first violation notice for having moving boxers visible through our front window. "It creates an unsightly appearance and suggests disorder," she explained, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. My husband, ever the diplomat, thanked her for the information and assured her we'd address everything as quickly as possible. Patricia gave Lily a cursory glance, sniffed as if she smelled something unpleasant, and returned to her Lexus, leaving us standing there with a growing sense of unease. Over the next few weeks, we learned that Patricia Hendricks wasn't just the HOA president. She was a one-woman surveillance state. She patrolled the neighborhood in her Lexus at least 3 times daily, documenting every infraction with the dedication of a forensic investigator. Our neighbors, a lovely elderly couple named the Johnsons, warned us that Patricia had driven out 3 families in the past 2 years with her relentless campaign of citations, fines, and complaints. "She's gotten worse since her divorce," Mrs. Johnson whispered conspiratorially over the fence while I was trying to tend our struggling garden. "She's got nothing else to focus on but making everyone else miserable." The violations started piling up faster than we could address them. Our lawn was a 1/4 inch too long. We'd planted petunias when the approved flower list only included marigolds and impatiens. Marcus had left his car parked in the driveway overnight instead of in the garage. We'd hung a wreath on our door that wasn't on the pre-approved seasonal decoration list. Each violation came with a $50 fine, and they were accumulating at an alarming rate. When I tried to discuss the situation reasonably with Patricia, suggesting that, as new homeowners, we needed some time to learn all the rules, she looked at me as if I had suggested we paint the house neon pink. "Rules are rules, dear," she said with false sympathy. "If we make exceptions for one person, the whole neighborhood falls apart. You wouldn't want to live in chaos, would you?" The way she said it made me feel like a child being scolded for not understanding basic social contracts. I bit back a dozen angry responses, thinking about how we couldn't afford to make enemies in our new community, especially not with someone as influential as the HOA president. But Patricia's obsession with our family seemed to go beyond normal HOA enforcement. I started noticing her car parked across the street at odd hours. Patricia, inside with her phone, pointed at our house. She began showing up whenever we were in the yard, offering unsolicited advice about everything from how I should be dressing Lily for the weather, to the proper way to trim hedges. The other neighbors started giving us sympathetic looks, and more than one person quietly mentioned that Patricia seemed unusually fixated on our family specifically. The situation deteriorated rapidly after the 4th of July. We'd hosted a small barbecue, nothing excessive, just Marcus's brother and his family, my parents, and the Johnsons from next door. We were careful to follow every rule. Music off by 9 o'clock. Guests parked in our driveway and not on the street. No decorations that violated the bylaws. We thought we'd covered all our bases. We were wrong. The next morning, I found a citation taped to our door. According to Patricia, we'd violated the guest parking ordinance by having more than 2 vehicles in our driveway simultaneously. We'd exceeded the noise ordinance with excessive laughter at 8:47 p.m., and we'd failed to properly dispose of our trash since she'd spotted a single napkin that had blown into our bushes. The fine totaled $300. When I called the HOA hotline to dispute the charges, Patricia answered personally and informed me in a voice dripping with condescension that all violations had been properly documented with photographic evidence in time. It stumps. Perhaps if you spent less time socializing and more time maintaining your property, you wouldn't find yourself in this position, she added before I could respond. The line went dead, leaving me standing in my kitchen, shaking with frustration and disbelief. Marcus found me there 20 minutes later, still holding the phone, tears of anger streaming down my face. He wrapped his arms around me and promised we'd figure it out, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Between the mortgage, Lily's childcare costs, and the mounting HOA fines, our finances were being stretched dangerously thin. What truly frightened me, though, was Patricia's increasing interest in Lily. At 6 months old, my daughter was at that beautiful stage where she smiled at everyone, completely unaware that some people didn't deserve her trust. Whenever Patricia saw us during her neighborhood patrols, she'd stop and linger, watching Lily with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't the typical, "Oh, what a cute baby" look that most people gave us. There was something colder in her gaze, something calculating that made my maternal instincts scream warnings. One afternoon in late July, I was pushing Lily in her stroller through the neighborhood, trying to enjoy the brief respite from the oppressive heat. Patricia appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, blocking the sidewalk with her body. "She shouldn't be out in this weather," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "Infants can overheat very easily. It's irresponsible parenting." I explained that Lily was dressed appropriately, I had water and supplies, and we were only taking a short walk. Patricia stepped closer, her face hardening. "I'm simply concerned for the child's welfare. Someone needs to look out for her, since you clearly don't understand proper childcare." The accusation left me speechless. Before I could formulate a response, Patricia had pulled out her phone and taken several photos of Lily in her stroller. "Documentation," she said simply, when I demanded to know what she was doing, "in case Child Protective Services needs evidence of negligence." She walked away before I could react, leaving me trembling with a volatile mixture of rage and fear. That evening, Marcus and I had our first serious discussion about selling the house and moving, but the reality was brutal. We'd sunk everything into the down payment and the repairs we'd already made. We were trapped. The next incident occurred at the community pool. It was a sweltering Saturday, and I'd taken Lily to the baby pool area, a shallow section specifically designed for infants and toddlers. I was sitting on the steps with Lily in my lap, letting her splash her feet in the water while other parents did the same with their children. It should have been a peaceful, normal afternoon. Then Patricia arrived. She marched over to where I sat, her face flushed with what I initially thought was heat but quickly recognized as anger. "Infants under 1 year aren't allowed in the pool," she announced loudly enough that every parent in the area turned to stare. I pointed to the sign clearly stating that the baby pool was for children ages 0 to 3. Patricia's jaw tightened. "That sign is outdated. The board voted last month to change the age requirement. You should check your emails more carefully." Several other parents exchanged confused glances, and one mother spoke up to say she hadn't received any such email. Patricia ignored her, focusing entirely on me. "Remove the child from the water immediately, or I'll have security escort you out." Rather than cause a scene, I complied, gathering Lily and our things, while trying to soothe her confusion at our abrupt departure. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Patricia telling another mother that some people simply don't have the sense God gave them when it comes to child safety. The humiliation burned, but it was nothing compared to the fear growing in my chest. Patricia's behavior had crossed a line from annoying to genuinely concerning. Her fixation on Lily felt dangerous in a way I couldn't quite articulate but couldn't ignore. I started documenting everything, taking photos of every citation, saving all emails and voicemails, keeping a detailed log of every interaction. Marcus thought I was being paranoid until the day he came home early from work and found Patricia in our backyard. She claimed she'd received reports of unauthorized construction and had the right to inspect any property in the neighborhood. The fact that our gate had been locked and she'd apparently climbed over it didn't seem to concern her at all. When Marcus threatened to call the police, she simply smiled and reminded him that, SHO at present, she had certain legal authorities granted by the bylaws we'd agreed to when purchasing the house that night. Neither of us slept well. We tripped all the locks and I moved Lily's crib into our bedroom, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Mrs. Johnson stopped by the next morning with freshly baked cookies and a warning. Patricia's done this before, she told us quietly, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. 3 years ago, a young couple with a baby moved in 2 streets over. She'd decided they weren't suitable for the neighborhood. By the time they finally moved away 6 months later, they'd racked up nearly $10,000 in HOA fines, and the wife had filed 3 police reports for harassment. The question I should have asked, but didn't, was simple. What had finally made that family leave? I wish I'd known then what I learned later. That Patricia's harassment had culminated in an incident involving their child that had been hushed up to avoid legal complications for the HOA. If I'd known, maybe I would have packed our bags that very day. Financial loss be damned. Instead, I thanked Mrs. Johnson for the warning and the cookies, assured her we could handle Patricia, and went about my day, completely unaware that we were heading toward a confrontation that would change everything. August 17th started like any other oppressively hot summer day. I'd been up since 5 with Lily, who was teething and having a rough time of it. Marcus had already left for an important client meeting, kissing both of us goodbye and promising to be home early. I spent the morning in a haze of exhaustion, bouncing Lily, singing songs, trying every trick I knew to soothe her discomfort. By noon, she'd finally fallen into a fitful sleep in my arms, and I carefully transferred her to her portable playpen in the living room so I could attempt to clean up the breakfast. Disaster still decorating our kitchen. I had just started loading the dishwasher when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Patricia's Lexus in the driveway, and my stomach immediately knotted with dread. I considered not answering, but she'd already seen me through the window and was pressing the bell repeatedly, the chiming certain to wake Lily. Resigned, I opened the door to find Patricia holding yet another clipboard, her expression even more severe than usual. "We need to discuss your property maintenance," she began without preamble. "I've received multiple complaints about the state of your lawn, your failure to address the peeling paint on the eastern side of the house, and the fact that you have a child's toy visible in your front yard." The toy in question was a small, stuffed rabbit that had fallen out of Lily's diaper bag that morning. I'd planned to grab it when I went to check the mail. "I'm giving you 48 hours to rectify all violations, or the fines will double." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, maybe it was the months of accumulated harassment, or maybe it was just the sheer absurdity of being threatened over a stuffed animal. But I finally lost my composure. "This is harassment," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You've been targeting my family since we moved in. I'm not paying these ridiculous fines anymore, and if you don't leave us alone, I'm hiring a lawyer." The words felt good coming out, empowering even, but the look that crossed Patricia's face made my blood run cold. Her expression transformed from irritation to something much darker, something almost unhinged. "You think you can threaten me?" she hissed, stepping closer. "I am this neighborhood. I maintain the standards that keep property values high and keep out people who don't belong here. People like you." The mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the ugly prejudice and control issues that had been simmering beneath the surface all along. Before I could respond, Lily's cry echoed from inside the house, startled awake by our raised voices. I moved to close the door, but Patricia pushed forward, trying to see into the house. "Is that baby crying again?" "She's always crying." "Maybe if you were a competent mother." I slammed the door in her face, my hand shaking as I locked it and rushed to Lily. Through the window, I watched Patricia stand on my porch for a long moment before finally returning to her car, but she didn't leave. She sat there, in her Lexus, staring at the house with an intensity that made me grab my phone and take a photo, some instinct telling me I needed evidence of this escalation. The afternoon passed, intense, quiet. I tried to focus on Lily, on the mundane routines of feeding and changing and playing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced out the window, Patricia's car was still there, or driving slowly past, or parked just down the street with a clear view of our house. I called Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He was probably still in his meeting. I texted Mrs. Johnson, who responded that she'd noticed Patricia's unusual behavior too and was keeping an eye out from her window. Around 4 o'clock, I decided we both needed some fresh air to shake off the oppressive atmosphere. The backyard seemed like a safe option, away from the street and Patricia's surveillance. I spread a blanket under our large oak tree, set Lily down with some toys, and tried to enjoy watching her discover the wonder of grass and leaves. The yard was enclosed by a tall wooden fence, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe without being scrutinized. What I didn't know was that our property backed up to a piece of common land that the HOA maintained, a small wooded area with a walking path. And in that wooded area, hidden from view for decades by overgrowth, and deliberately obscured by previous HOA boards who knew it was a liability. It was an old well from when the land had been farmland. It was a deep well, at least 40 feet. Its opening covered only by a rotting wooden board and some rusted wire mesh that had long since separated from its moorings. The HOA had never properly sealed it, never put up adequate warnings or barriers. They'd simply let nature hide it and hoped no one would ever find it. I was watching Lily attempt to crawl toward a butterfly when I heard the gate latch click open. My head snapped up to see Patricia striding into my backyard as if she owned it. This gate was unlocked, she announced. That's a security violation. Also, I need to inspect your fence line for compliance with height regulations. The absurdity of her excuse was obvious, but the determination in her eyes was frightening. I scooped up Lily and stood, placing myself between my daughter and this woman who had clearly lost all sense of boundaries. Get out of my yard, I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. You have no right to be here. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. Patricia laughed, actually laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. Call them. I have every legal right to inspect HOA properties. It's in the bylaws you agreed to. She pulled out her phone and began taking photos of our fence, our garden, our patio furniture, narrating violations into a voice recorder as she walked the perimeter of the yard. I was fumbling for my own phone, trying to dial 911 while holding Lily. When Patricia's path took her toward the back corner of our lot, near where the property line blurred into the common area, I saw her push through some overgrown bushes, still rambling about property boundaries and maintenance requirements. Then I heard her voice change, taking on a note of excitement. Well, this is a significant hazard. The HOA will need to address this immediately. You should have reported this dangerous condition on your property. Curious, despite my anger, I followed, still keeping Lily secure in my arms. Through the bushes, I could see what Patricia had found. The old well, its covering partially collapsed, revealing a dark opening roughly 3 feet across. Even from several feet away, I couldn't see the bottom, just darkness and the smell of damp earth and decay. That's not on our property, I said. That's in the common area. We didn't even know it was there. Patricia turned to look at me, and the expression on her face made every maternal instinct the first possessed scream in alarm. Her eyes had taken on a glazed, almost manic quality, and when she spoke, her voice had a dreamy, disconnected tone that was somehow more terrifying than her previous anger. You know, accidents happen all the time with children, especially with mothers who are careless, who don't watch their babies closely enough. A tragedy like a child falling into an old well, well, it would be devastating, but it would also prove what I've been saying all along about your unsuitability as a parent. Time seemed to slow down as Patricia's words registered. She took a step toward me, her hands already reaching out toward Lily. Every horror story I'd ever heard, every true crime documentary I'd watched, every worst-case scenario that had flickered through my mind during anxious midnight hours suddenly crystallized into this single, terrible moment. This woman, this person who had cloaked her instability in the respectable veneer of HOA authority, was actually threatening my child. I stumbled backward, clutching Lily so tightly she began to whimper. Don't you dare come near her, I said, my voice rising. Don't you dare touch my baby. But Patricia kept advancing, her movements jerky and unpredictable, her rational facade completely shattered. She was muttering now, something about how she'd warned me, how I'd refused to listen, how some people just didn't deserve children. The well yawned behind her, and with sickening clarity, I understood her intention. She was going to try to take Lily from me and throw her into that well, then claim it was a tragic accident caused by my negligence. I screamed. It wasn't a word, or even a conscious decision, just a primal sound of terror and fury that tore from my throat with enough force to hurt. I screamed like I'd never screamed before, with all the fear and rage and desperate love of a mother facing the unthinkable. And I kept screaming as I ran, crashing back through the bushes, toward my house, toward safety, toward anything that might protect my baby from this madwoman. Patricia lunged after me, surprisingly fast, her fingers actually brushing Lily's clothing. I felt the tug and kicked out blindly behind me, connecting with something solid. It was a grunt of pain, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just kept running while screaming for help at the top of my lungs. Behind me, I could hear Patricia's footsteps, hear her shouting something about how I couldn't run from this, how she was going to make sure everyone knew what a terrible mother I was. I'd almost reached my patio when I heard other voices. Beautiful voices shouting questions and commands. Through my panic, I recognized Mrs. Johnson's voice, and Mr. Peterson from 3 doors down, and several others. My screams had brought the neighbors running, and they were pouring into my backyard, through the side gates, drawn by the unmistakable sound of someone in desperate trouble. She tried to take my baby, I sobbed, finally reaching Mrs. Johnson, who immediately wrapped her arms around both Lily and me. She was going to throw her in the well. She said it would be an accident. The words, tumbled out in a confused rush, barely coherent, but the neighbors had already turned their attention to Patricia, who had stopped at the edge of my patio, her face flushed and her chest heaving. For a moment I thought she might try to talk her way out of it, to spin some story that made me the villain and her the concerned citizen. But surrounded by 8 or 9 neighbors, all of them staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust, something in Patricia seemed to break completely. "That child doesn't belong here," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "None of you understand what I've done for this neighborhood, the standards I've maintained. Won't let her ruin everything with her crying and her mess and her completely inappropriate parents." Mr. Peterson already had his phone out. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly. "Patricia, I think you need to sit down and wait for them to arrive." But Patricia wasn't done. She started ranting about property values and neighborhood standards, and how she'd sacrificed everything for Willowbrook Estates, her words becoming increasingly disconnected from reality. She claimed the HOA board had given her special authority, that she was protecting us all from undesirable elements, that she'd done this before and would do it again because someone had to maintain civilization. That last statement made several neighbors exchange significant looks, and I remembered what Mrs. Johnson had told me about the previous family. "She's done this before," Mrs. Johnson said quietly, confirming my thoughts. "We should have stopped her years ago, but we were cowards. We let her drive out that young family, and we told ourselves it wasn't our business." The guilt in her voice was palpable, but more important was the resolve I saw forming on every face around me. This time, they weren't going to look away. The police arrived within minutes, responding to multiple 911 calls from neighbors who'd heard my screams. As I gave my statement to an officer, still holding Lily against my chest like she might evaporate, if I loosened my grip, I watched another officer handcuff Petruccio and guide her into the back of a patrol car. She was still talking, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong, still maintaining that she was the victim in all of this. The officer taking my statement had me show him the well, and his expression grew increasingly grim as he examined as I have set a sight, and listened to Patricia's recorded threats on my phone. "You did the right thing by screaming," he told me. "If your neighbors hadn't heard you, ... You didn't finish the sentence? Didn't need to. We both knew how differently this day could have ended." He explained that Patricia would be charged with attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, and several other crimes. He also mentioned that this wasn't the first time Patricia had raised red flags with local law enforcement, that there had been complaints and reports over the years, but nothing actionable until now. Marcos arrived home to find our yard full of police, cars, and neighbors, and his face went through approximately 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. After I explained what had happened, he couldn't speak for a full minute, just held both Lily and me while trembling with the horror of what might have been. Later that evening, after the police had left and the neighbors had reluctantly dispersed, after we'd checked every lock twice and set up our old baby monitor to watch Lily's crib from our room, we finally had a chance to process everything. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks and months in ways we couldn't have predicted. Patricia was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. During the investigation, it came to light that she'd been struggling with severe mental health issues for years, exacerbated by her divorce and the loss of custody of her own children due to concerning behavior. Her fixation on Lily had apparently been a twisted projection of her own failures as a parent, combined with a delusional belief that she could somehow protect the neighborhood from people she deemed unworthy. The HOA board underwent a complete restructuring after it was revealed that they'd knowingly ignored the hazardous well and had failed to properly address multiple complaints about Patricia's behavior over the years. The organization faced significant liability, and several board members resigned in disgrace. A new board was elected, composed of neighbors who actually wanted to build community rather than enforce arbitrary rules. And one of their first acts was to properly seal the old well and conduct a thorough safety inspection of all common areas. Our neighbors, many of whom admitted they'd been too intimidated by Patricia to speak up before, rallied around us with remarkable support. Mrs. Johnson organized meals for the first week while we recovered from the trauma. Mr. Peterson and several other neighbors helped Marcus expedite all the repairs Patricia had been citing us for, refusing to accept payment and treating it as a community project. The atmosphere in Willowbrook Estates transformed, almost overnight, from one of fearful compliance to genuine niggivers. As for us, we seriously considered moving, despite everything. The house and neighborhood held terrible memories of that day, and I had nightmares for months about losing Lily to that dark well. But we also recognized that we'd found something rare in those neighbors who'd come running at my screams, who'd stood between my family and danger, who'd finally found the courage to stand up against tyranny masquerading as order. We decided to stay, to reclaim our home and our community from the shadow Patricia had cast over it. Lily, mercifully, was too young to remember any of it. She continued to grow and thrive, learning to walk in our backyard that same autumn, completely unaware of the danger that had once lurked beyond the fence. Sometimes I watch her play and think about that August afternoon, about how quickly everything can change, about how thin the line is between ordinary life and catastrophe, but mostly I think about the power of community, about how my screams had brought people running, about how silence and fear enable cruelty while courage and solidarity defeated. Patricia eventually pleaded guilty to reduce charges in exchange for mandatory mental health treatment and a permanent restraining order, keeping her away from our family and the neighborhood. We heard through the legal grapevine that she'd moved to another state to live with relatives, far from any position of authority where she could harm others. The civil lawsuit against the HOA for maintaining the hazardous well was settled out of court, providing us with enough money to finally complete all the home repairs and establish a college fund for Lily. Today, when new families move into Willowbrook Estates, they hear the story as a cautionary tale and a point of pride. It's a reminder of what can happen when power goes unchecked, when mental illness is ignored, when people look away from obvious red flags. But it's also a story about survival, about the strength of a mother's love, about neighbors who found their courage when it mattered most. Our house is no longer the source of citations and violations, but rather the home where the neighborhood learned to value people over property values, safety over aesthetics, and compassion over compliance. And every time I hear a child laugh in our backyard, I'm reminded of how precious and fragile life is, and how grateful I am for the screams that saved everything that matters.